Today's episode is sponsored by Caddy, reducing procurement costs for manufacturers by reducing pricing inconsistencies and consolidating suppliers for optimal sourcing. Visit them at drawer.caddy.com.
Aerospace and defense manufacturing.
Machines and automation.
Additive manufacturing.
Smart manufacturing.
The global manufacturing economy.
Welcome to Advanced Manufacturing Now, the podcast for manufacturing professionals, powered by SME. From the design screen to the shop floor to final assembly, we drive the conversation about making manufacturing smarter by connecting people who are passionate about manufacturing.
Hello and welcome to Advanced Manufacturing Now, the podcast for manufacturing professionals. I'm your host, Amy Bryson, contributing lead editor of Smart Manufacturing magazine. Today we'll be talking about transforming tacit knowledge into best practices. And tacit knowledge in manufacturing can include everything like skills and expertise that workers gain through experiences, observation, and practice. And this is a fascinating topic, and we're lucky to be joined by two guests today who will explain a lot more about the subject. First, we have Chris Brown. Now, Chris is VP of Sales at Caddy, an AI-enabled platform that is designed to revolutionize how manufacturing drawings are managed and accessed. Caddy is a centralized, format-agnostic solution with advanced image analysis algorithms, and I think that is music to the ears of many of our listeners. And joining Chris is Kathy Ma, VP of Integrated Product Solutions at the Association for Manufacturing Technology. And for anyone who doesn't know, AMT offers the manufacturing industry market access and intelligence for manufacturing technology. Chris and Kathy, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you for having us, Amy.
You're welcome. Now, together, you all have more than 3 decades of experience helping companies do something that a lot of our listeners struggle with, and that is harmonizing talent and business processes to drive revenue growth. And before we jump into our topic, can you each share a bit more background about yourselves and how you got into digital manufacturing? Kathy, let's start with you.
Amy, so I started my career as a sociologist of Wikipedia. I spent 2 years really kind of going into the belly of the big beast. The whole really interesting start of my background is growing up, around mid-2000s. You see a proliferation of open source software development and people getting together to try to make the world a better place. Within that, I started spending a lot of time understanding how trust and knowledge creation can be facilitated by data and knowledge and technologies. So for the next decade and a half, I actually worked across media company, financial businesses, branding agency, now at manufacturing technology, to really help companies do 2 things. Number one, using technologies to better organize knowledge and data. Number 2, building the processes and business systems to help them grow their businesses. Now, I'm really excited to talk to Chris as well, because for the last 5 years before I joined AMT, I was at Thomas. Some of you might have heard Thomas, a big green book, thomasnet.com. And the platform served over 1.5 million registered industry buyers across 76,000 sourcing categories. And Xometry obviously bought the business, and it is a 2-sided marketplace for AI-powered custom procurement for manufacturing. So I met Chris there, and we became really good friends, and I'm excited to really talk to Chris and share with him on our passion around tacit knowledge management and how that inform business processes. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Kathy. That's a phenomenal background, and I'm always impressed every time that we talk with the knowledge that you have. So very excited to be here with you today. My journey began a little bit different, and I started working for a manufacturer at a young age. I was 21 years old when I started working in sales for a manufacturing company. The company was Proto Labs, and at that time it was a very small organization. It's obviously grown into a much larger organization than that now. And I started in sales there, and if there's one thing that I learned very, very, very quickly in my career, it was that engineers were always going to be smarter than me, and that I had to rely on them for a very large portion of my role. And unfortunately, that meant creating a lot of tacit knowledge. I would have a lot of questions about how a part is made. Can a part be made a different way? How do we make it more affordable? And all of that was in our engineering team's heads. It wasn't documented anywhere, and much to potentially my failure there, right? I kept that tacit knowledge in my head as well as that was transferred. And it became this transfer of tacit knowledge from one person to the next person to the next person without it necessarily being documented and easily transferred from human to human. We eventually grew that company into what it is today. I had left that organization in 2015. I spent a small amount of time at an organization called Intertech, where we did testing, inspection, and certification of product. And at that organization, because it is an enterprise company, 40,000 employee company, that problem only continued to persist. Documentation around this tacit knowledge was non-existent. How do we test a product to make sure it's safe? How do we test a product to make sure that it's not a fire hazard, an electrical shock hazard? All of this data and information, it was either read a 200-page standard in order to figure it out, or go walk over to one of our engineers and ask the question in order to get the quote-unquote cliff note of that 200-page document. From there, I joined an organization called Xometry, as Kathy had mentioned, where I was very instrumental in passing along a lot of that tacit knowledge and creating databases of this tacit knowledge as we grew that organization from 5 sales reps to over 100 sales reps in under 3.5 years. And in having that documented, that's where I really learned that documenting it, putting it into an easy to digest format, making it very searchable for your next employees was so incredibly important to hyperscale growth. And I think that even if you're not paying attention to hyperscale growth, if you simply want to onboard 2 new buyers, 2 more engineers, 2 more sales reps over the course of the next 2 years, documenting it is so incredibly valuable. Making it easily searched, easily indexed is so incredibly valuable. And that's one of the largest reasons why I joined Caddy to begin with, was that we were taking all of this unstructured data and structured data and making it so easy to search, making it so well indexed that you didn't, once you found your first string to pull on, you could explore all of that, what used to be tacit knowledge inside of a structured data set so incredibly easy. And so that's a little bit of background on myself, how I got into this, and why I feel that this topic is so incredibly important to the world of manufacturing right now.
Great. Thank you both for that background. And I'd like to talk a little bit about tacit knowledge. Really, what is it? I mean, I don't hear that phrase a lot. We hear a lot about manufacturing. Some of the pain points are knowledge transfer, whether it's a lot of people with decades of experience retiring out and needing to transfer that knowledge to the next generation of workforce. But I don't really hear a lot about what tacit knowledge is in relation to other types of knowledge. So can you define it a little bit and give some examples of what that looks like in terms of, manufacturing environments?
Sure. The simplest example of solid tacit knowledge is, how do you do something for the first time that you've never done before? Or how do you articulate and explain to other people something that you are very good at, you can do end-to-end from end to end? A very good way to think about it is, in the world of manufacturing, sometimes when you're building a new component or new part, you have to really figure out a lot of what we coined as the unknown unknown. Like, what do I need to even know about so that I would ensure the product become a huge success? In the world of organizational knowledge management, there are a lot of really good examples in the engineering and design space, for example. When it comes to material science, you could be the best design engineer and draw the most beautiful CAD files. But if you are not an expert in material science, occasionally when you pair it up with a material science engineer, they may come in and say, hey, the part is perfectly rendered, but the material might not be able to withstand the pressure. when it's being implemented into a live aerospace scenario. So that's a really good example of Tacit knowledge that often you cannot just Google your way out of it. You sort of have to pair up with people that have experienced a production cycle, pair up with them to really kind of tease out, what do I even not know that I have to know in order for me to save a lot of failure and testing and experimentation to get to the level of success that I've been tasked to do. So that would be my definition of tacit knowledge. And Chris, does it make sense to you? Because I know in CADI, within your environment, you work with so many engineers leveraging data, experience, and AI to really save a lot of that sort of pain points.
Your explanation absolutely makes sense, Kathy, and I think I want to land it a little bit closer to home for some of our audience members here. You did a really good job of landing it in regards to the engineering world. I want to explain it a little bit in regards to sales and procurement as well. When we talk about tacit knowledge in a sales world, for example, we're talking about things along the lines of who a company's clients are, who's a key client versus a standard client. What service levels are these clients expecting? What is our win rate like when we're selling the service of manufacturing to specific companies? Do we always win one particular type of geometry from this organization? Do we win across the board at a certain price point regardless of geometry? What types of lead times is this particular organization expecting of us? And when you have a sales rep who's been in the role for 20, 25 years, when you have a CEO who has been also acting as a seller, right? An owner of a small machine shop who's been acting as a seller when they first bring on their very first sales rep, there's typically a lot of fear in handing those accounts over to that new young sales rep because all of this tacit knowledge exists. And it's very hard to transfer that type of knowledge. And if you do try to transfer it, it typically ends up consuming a significant amount of time, right? Every time that a quote request comes in from that particular client, that new young sales rep is going to go back to the owner. How have you handled this in the past? This is a new geometry. This is a new material. What are the customer's expectations? And that handoff process almost ends up taking more time than just managing it as the owner on your own. This is all data that exists, both structured inside of their quotes that have gone out the door in the past, the orders that they've received from the customer in the past. It can be unstructured data that exists inside of emails, inside of handwritten notes on their customers or on the owner's desk, right? And that's all incredibly important information to transfer. We'll get into how to transfer that a little bit later. But then you zoom over to a procurement department, even at a mid-sized organization where 3 or 4 buyers are handling the acquisition of components of manufactured goods, and it becomes who in our supply chain is good at making parts like this. And I often experience when talking to our customers here at CADI, hearing stories of we hired a new buyer, and for the first 6 months, every time that engineering handed a drawing over to the buyer and said, "Hey, I need 20 of these," that buyer would walk around the engineering department asking, "Hey, who should make this part for us? Who's good at making this part for us?" And seeking that tacit knowledge that existed inside of that engineering team that couldn't be displayed inside of an approved vendor list in the past and things along those lines. So, bringing it really close to our, the viewers that are with us here today, the listeners that are with us here today, it's really a lot about that engineering use case inside of manufacturing, that sales use case, and that procurement use case inside of manufacturing.
So that's a great explanation. I'm wondering if you're seeing some common issues in the industry and what best practices have the biggest transformational impact. I know you talked a little bit about small and mid-size, which is great because our audience is comprised of both small shops, mid-size shops, as well as the the large guys, and I'm wondering if we could start by talking about, best practices for small to mid-size.
So right after the pandemic, we at Thomas did a research about what buyers are looking for. And going back to the power of Tacit knowledge, when you can structurally organize demand and needs and actually figure out a way in organizing your solutions to map those users' needs, you actually reduce a lot of cognitive load for buyers and sellers to connect and actually render successful solutions together. One good example is after the pandemic, people understand that, sure, we have to optimize for price per piece or per surface. And also, of course, we need to make sure that, you fit all the quality certification like ISO or ITAR if you're in aerospace. But there are additional considerations that people are starting to think about, like availability and lead time. When it comes to the engineering world, we all know that, depending on the complexity of the CAD project or the design, it's harder to really kind of give people the level of confidence of quality and lead time projection. And this is where service delivery, procurement, engineers can work together by organizing the way they think about the product and the service and the cost together. A good example is, and I'm sure Chris can add a lot of context to it with his CADI experience. A very good example is, when you have small to mid-sized companies, there are projects that when you look at the design file, the custom manufacturers would say, this is actually our sweet spot. This is a level of tolerance in geometry that we've done before, and we know that we can confidently deliver the product. And on the other side, for the buyer community, they also have a little black book of vendors that they have worked with before, that they know for certain types of project, component, and designs, there are certain vendors that are very good at either optimizing for cost or for the speed of delivery, but also some of them could be very good in dealing with complex geometry and super high tolerance. But where do you store those knowledge, right? So I think the key for smaller businesses in terms of how they can optimize their production workflow, but also the sales side of things is a two-sided market, and also for the delivery production side of the solutions, it is to really understand that it's a 3-steps process to really think through how good are you in practicing tacit knowledge collection and management. Number 1, think through your business process, be it on the sales side or the production side. You need to gather the structured and unstructured data that Chris was talking about. Like, for example, your vendor selection list, the criteria on the buyer side, but also, who have you worked with before that gave you good experience and good results? Get that data into one place. It could be in someone's Excel files and fax machines or someone's brain. First question you ask yourself is, in your organization, big or small, how are you storing all those data? Is it in one place? The second really important part of the best practice is data normalization, creating a structure around it. I'm sure you might have seen 25 spreadsheets thrown around in terms of, hey, these are the vendors that are really good in injection molding, or, oh, that's the CNC list. Oh, that's the new additive list. But do you actually have a way to render all of that performance history and data and normalize it into a way that even an intern coming in can help you find something that you need based on the project you're working on? That's a test of, how good you are in being intentional about the data structure. And the final part of it, which is the hardest part, getting your organization a sense of knowledge custodianship. As a former Wikipedia sociologist, the power of custodianship cannot be understated. You want people that know what they're doing to constantly be nurturing the database. If something changed, some business closed, or, we've seen it a lot in our industry, that could be a great partner for the last 10 years, but they're sold to a private equity, for example, and they completely change how they work and they no longer fit your business purpose. Are you updating that database so that you don't waste your colleagues' time to go back to that vendor and ask the same questions just to get to the end that, they can never deliver what you asked for? So I'll repeat, the 3 things that are always a bit of a big challenge is identifying the pockets of knowledge and understanding where you're storing the data. Number 2, creating structure and a way to normalize that database so that it's usable. But number 3, which is the hardest, creating a culture of custodianship and a process so that teams are encouraged to constantly up, making sure that the garden of knowledge are kept up to date so that it will save thousands of hours a year across your whole work floor in terms of, who do I speak to about what? Oh, just go to this tool. Just go to this tool. So, Chris, those are my 3 steps, kind of best practice in organizing tacit knowledge. And I know you have a lot of industry experience. What do you think?
I think your the 3 steps that you just laid out there couldn't be any more accurate. I think one of the things that I've recognized since stepping into this role here at Caddy, and I hope that you agree with me. If not, I welcome that conversation. I think that you and I might have been a little spoiled in our past lives. We've worked for technology companies, even though we've been in manufacturing, right? Thomas developing an online directory of all of these manufacturers and keeping a very clean database of them and keeping score of them and understanding what they do, having that incredibly well documented, having it very searchable. On the Xometry side, being the exact same way with technology-driven organization, we were keeping incredibly detailed scorecards in regards to our vendors. We knew exactly how they performed. We were collecting a lot of data on them, right? I think that I started to recognize how spoiled my past life had been in regards to that when I got to Caddy and started meeting a lot of our customers and realizing that the data collection isn't always front of mind, right? And that we've done a really good job in this country of promoting digital transformation, and also that maybe our smaller manufacturers and our smaller mid-sized manufacturers have struggled a little bit with that digital transformation. I walk around manufacturing floors these days, and I walk through their sales offices and their procurement offices, and I still see handwritten notes being taken on drawings, right? I still see handwritten things being handed from one engineer to the next. And if that isn't being created in a digital environment and that isn't being scanned back into a digital environment, storing that data becomes incredibly challenging. Even the organizations that are becoming better at digital transformation, they have paperless initiatives, for example, and therefore they're using Adobe to write their notes on a PDF and emailing them to the next person that needs that document. The organizations that are taking their travelers that float around their manufacturing floors from machine to machine as the parts being manufactured, they're storing that, they're scanning and storing that data again, or even better, they're transforming over to tablets for that type of information. The next point that you made, topic number 2 that you were talking about there, is normalizing that data. And what I actually see in practice is all we've done is move from silos of tacit knowledge being in people's heads to silos of database knowledge being stored across multiple systems that are not connected, that they are not normalized to each other. And at those types of manufacturing facilities and OEMs, what I'm often experiencing is I have to use this system in order to find a part number, and then I've got to go into this system in order to learn about the quality of this part number, and then I've got to go into this system in order to learn about the procurement data behind this particular part number. And it begs the question of did digital transformation simply take the silos from the filing cabinets and the brains and put them into digital silos? And that's that data normalization is really where Caddy strives to help our customers the most, is by using that drawing and normalizing all of that data against that drawing, so that really that third stage that Kathy mentions, right, the stewardship of the data, can actually be utilized, can actually be accomplished. Who's going in and updating, we just received a defective part, there's a new defect, report inside of our defect document management system? How does that actually get into the other systems where people are going to find that information? And who is the steward of that? Really begs the next question of, is it humans that should be doing that stewardship, or is it AI that should be doing that stewardship? Because as you grow as an organization, as you manufacture more parts, as you sell more parts, more services towards manufacturing, as you procure more parts, can a human keep up with that? Or is that too big of a task? Is that too much of a task? And frankly, I think my opinion on that topic is that AI should be augmenting the human. There's always going to be a role for the human, even though AI can absorb this data, normalize this data, steward this data. There's still going to continue to be a very large role for humans to play in the actual generation of the data and pointing the AI at those particular pieces of data.
I'm going to quickly add to what Chris is saying because it ties to a concept that's really close to my heart, which is design for manufacturing and the feedback process. Tacit knowledge is really important in the context of interdisciplinary kind of collaboration. When someone designs a CAD file, you really need to bring in experts, between the manufacturing process part, the material use, and then the environment is going to produce in, and also compliance and testing. And often, traditionally, a design engineer might have to go through many meetings. Chris and I were chatting about it. Sometimes you might have to queue in 12 people to just render through that whole kind of internal process, because the cost of changing a design after you already tooled up a production line would be exponentially more expensive than when you bring in people with all the Tacit knowledge at the beginning to give you that coaching, feedback, and iteration. Now, the truth is that actually is a lot of synchronous hours you're trying to get from people that are busy doing their jobs. So I think we are both, Chris and I, as technologists, we're both really passionate about thinking about the future where, CADI can bring in all that history of different CAD files that had high success rate in production, or may even measure downstream, manufacturing defect rate, which is something that the industry average is about 5%. Think about if you can actually future-proof your production quality over time by actually bringing in the history of your vendor capability, your internal knowledge, and all that kind of interdisciplinary knowledge. But instead of talking to all that people and doing 25 Zoom calls, we're done with that. You upload that sort of design that you're thinking about using CADI's technology to really kind of answer all those questions within minutes as opposed to months. I think that's the biggest innovation I've seen in recent years in terms of leveraging data, historical experience, and trust to kind of help people get their job done a lot faster and a lot cheaper.
Kathy's elaborating on a story that I was mentioning to her when I was out at a customer's facility recently. And prior to implementing our solution, for every part that they sourced, this was an OEM, so they were manufacturing a very small amount of their product in-house, and they were outsourcing a very large amount of their product. And in every single sourcing event, for every single part, they were bringing together a team of 14 individuals, because each of those individuals had a small amount of knowledge about who was in their supply chain, who performed well at what, who hits targets, who's the most affordable for certain geometries. And they were pulling together these 14 individuals for every single part that they were going to source, putting the drawing on the table, and everyone would review the drawing really quickly, and they would share the knowledge that they had about the geometry and the types of vendors that they should be utilizing. And then they would break and go from there. And I prodded, a little bit more, and I asked him, some maybe personal questions about things like hourly salaries and stuff along those lines. And it became apparent that for every part that they were sourcing, they were spending roughly, $1,200 just to get to a point of who should we send this RFQ to? And that hurt, right? That's that is a lot of money to be spending, especially as a mid-sized OEM. And that's, at the end of the day, if you can absorb all of this tacit knowledge into technology, and you can database it correctly, and you can serve it to the right people at the right time, post-implementation, that's 3 minutes worth of work for one person to do now at that organization. They bring their drawing into our environment. They click a button that finds all of the similar parts that they've ever manufactured, and they have right on one screen all of the data in regards to similar parts that have been manufactured. Who manufactured it? What price was paid? What quantity was ordered? Were there ever defects? What's their quality score like? What's their communication score like? And one individual, no matter how new they are to the organization at this point in that company now, in under 3 minutes can decide who they're going to send that RFQ to, bringing those sourcing event dollars down under $10 per event. And that's how we need to be thinking about database, the ramifications of databasing this correctly, stewarding it correctly, and serving it to the right people at the right time.
I think that example is so tangible. I mean, that's a light bulb moment for sure. Chris, I imagine you have a lot of those light bulb moments with customers. I'm wondering if, when you talk about small and mid-sized and enterprise companies, do they have the same challenges? Are there differences? What are those light bulb moments for the OEMs and the enterprises?
Yeah, it's really interesting because the impact to the business, I feel, is greater at a smaller manufacturer. If you're having to pull together all of these people, you're pulling them away from the floor, you're pulling them away from their tasks, you have less overall labor within the organization to do it. However, the problem is exponentially greater as you become bigger. It's simply the costs, both in regards to time and money, aren't nearly as felt. When you think about a large organization, an enterprise organization, these companies have gone through 6, 12, 20 acquisitions over the past 30 years. They have, as a result of that, 30, 35, 40 different ERP systems, a dozen different quality systems, a dozen different procurement systems, so many more silos, and so much more turnover. And it's in that turnover where true tacit knowledge just gets lost entirely. It was never databased. It was never organized. And I think we all have to admit that, workers at a 10-person machine shop, a lot of those are, there for life. And that's something that I've always been really proud about being in this industry for. It is, I spent 8 years at Protolabs. I spent 6 years at Xometry. I plan on spending 10 plus years at Caddy, right? It's something that attracts me to this industry, especially the smaller manufacturing side of this industry. However, you have to admit that when you get up to a large enterprise company, a 40,000 person company, a 20,000 person company, the turnover is so much greater. The silos, there's so many more silos that exist. And even though you have all of these technology persons in IT and CTOs and developers and everything else along those lines, most of their time is being spent making sure that the outward facing side of the business looks very technology empowered and technology enabled. The last thing that they typically tend to think about is how do we develop tools for our own employees? And so I think to simply answer your question, the impact is greater at smaller organizations because they have less labor, they have less time to share. But the problem is exponentially more complicated as you grow in size.
And I would imagine, too, with larger organizations, that culture of change is harder to enact. And so I'm wondering if you have perspectives on that.
There's a sweet spot right in between, I think. I think that it takes an event for a small manufacturer to be thinking about this, to implement change. And I think that events can be more impactful at smaller organizations. The person who's been there for 20 years quoting all of their parts retiring. that is an event that is felt really hard at a small manufacturer as opposed to an enterprise level manufacturer. The sweet spot being the middle is, I tend to feel, is driven as a result of them wanting to grow, to wanting to become bigger, to wanting to become an enterprise. More people within that organization that wanted to grow, the more open to change that they are, the more receptive to, I want to try new tools that they are. And then you're right, at a large enterprise organization, maybe it's a little less about fear of change and more about the complexity of change. How many approvals do we need in order to change this? How much executive sponsorship do we need to change this? What are the priorities of those executives that are going to get in the way of this other type of change that we're trying to implement? And so I don't think it's linear. I think it's almost this bell curve where an event has to happen at a small organization for change to be inspired. A quality defect has to impact their business heavily. A human has to lead the organization. There's 1,000,001 events that force that type of change. The mid-tier accounts, the mid-tier companies, they're really always looking for ways to grow and continue to grow and are willing to take more risk. Your large enterprises, they want to grow, they want to change, but there's a lot more barriers involved in that change.
I'll add two quick things to what Chris is describing when it comes to change management in smaller and larger organizations. So what is interesting is the bigger the organization goes, as Chris describes, the complexity increases. And this is where Tacit knowledge management becomes exponentially more important, because you need to understand if you're changing one facet of the business, how is it going to actually positively or even negatively affect the rest of the business? A lot of times when we talk to bigger organization, if they want to change the ERP solution in how they manage all the vendors, everybody is going to freak out. It's like, whoa, how is it going to affect the billing, invoice, and vendor discovery, internal search engine? Right? Like engineers from big organization might be smiling at this point. So I think it's really important. The bigger the organization it is, the more they really think through how they can better organize all the Tacit knowledge. And the second note I would add about change management is that Tacit knowledge is about trust and it's about relationship building. It's about building that psychological safety that if you don't know about something, you know who to go to say that, right? So that you have a team of talent and they're willing to be vulnerable when they don't know about something and they can ask questions. Sometimes in a big organization, especially a public enterprise company, that becomes a lot harder. Because when you don't even know who you can ask, compounding with sometimes we have more work from home situation and you lose all that sort of, casual social interaction. It becomes, I think it's going to be a really interesting next generation management challenge for people who are remote. However, in the manufacturing world, I still think we are leaning towards more a hybrid or in-person approach. And to conclude, I do think when it comes to change management, Tacit knowledge management is really super important as a layer of that map for you to charter your strategic course. And on the other hand, I think organizations also need to think about, hey, knowledge doesn't live in a silo. It is powered by human and it's powered by relationship. So how do you continuously cultivate that trust so that people feel like if I don't know something, I can ask Amy or I can ask Chris, right? Pick up the phone and call people. We call it bridging social capital as sociologists. It's like, how do you talk to people that are different from you and be brave and be courageous? So ultimately, I think change management is a very interesting subject and maybe we should do another podcast about it. But
I think so. I think we could talk several hours on that. We could do a series because a lot of our listeners are challenged with that, and I think your points about trust and creating connections and a safety net and just that creates just more job satisfaction. It gives you a pathway to career success, and it also helps bridge the gap of what's happening now with, more seasoned workers and the new generation of talent coming together. So I think that those are fascinating topics. And so let's talk about some advice you would give to, manufacturing leaders if they were to go do one or two things today or tomorrow to help leverage their own tacit knowledge, what would those things be?
I think the biggest one that I would encourage is empower your people to try new things. DX swept through our, digital transformation swept through our industry 10, 15 years ago. And there were a lot of initiatives to go paperless then and to keep better databases. And a lot of the ways in which we utilize that data now, because the data sets are so massive, they are so disconnected, has to be AI. It's the only thing that can absorb so much knowledge and serve so much knowledge at the same time. And I think the biggest thing that I would really encourage every leader out there to do right now is listen to the people that are struggling with tacit knowledge the most. And those are the youngest, newest members of your company. And they've grown up in a world, they've graduated college in a world where they had access to AI. They trust it already. They know that it only augments their job, that it doesn't replace their job. And I think that there's a lot of fear in organizations from members that have been there a while that AI is going to replace my job. It's the old, kind of rabble. They took our jobs, the emotion behind it. And the younger people, the newer people to your organization understand that is not the case. It is not a replacement to a human. It's an augmentation to storing knowledge in our heads. Allow them to try it. Allow them to go through trials. Allow them to try and fail, right? You will onboard tools and software and techniques that don't work, right? And your organization's going to learn a lot more about what doesn't work on their journey towards finding what will work. And humans, people, this younger generation needs to be empowered to go try those things, to bring those technologies in, to present to their owners, their CEOs, their directors, these solutions, and be trusted to trial them out. Kathy, what do you have to add to that?
What Chris is describing is community. I love the manufacturing community. I worked across, as I mentioned, finance, media, and this is a community where it cares about its people within its vicinity of technology, right? We talk about different states. Instead of the Rust Belts, they are becoming the tech belts. Like, business leaders want to invest in the intergenerational capacity of the neighborhoods. And what's better than being in our industry? Now, the two things that you asked me to describe, I would say number one is leaders keep doing what you're doing, invest in the community. But what you might want to notice is, surprisingly, 82% of women who are in manufacturing industry, we really recommend the industry, but most of us fell into the industry. 1 in 4 women joined manufacturing by choice. 3 in 4 fell into manufacturing by accident. I did not. I grew up in a toy factory. My grandfather actually owned a toy factory. I used to run around the injection molding machine, right? But I never thought about joining manufacturing until Thomas recruited me. And even at that point, we second guess ourselves. It's like, I don't know anything about manufacturing, but I forgot I grew up in manufacturing. And so I think one thing we can do as business leaders is to really just, you know what, let's all pretend that we're extroverts, because there are so many introverts in our industry, and create networks. Talk to people that you don't normally talk to. And I think we are going through a very interesting sea change moment where Silicon Valley tech is like hitting a threshold, right? AI power generated technologies is like, ooh, who are the people who are doing things that might not be needed tomorrow? But think about what our industry needs. In order to codify complex geometry in producing parts, you need people that can understand Python G code. Like, let's actually talk to all these, tech people and see, hey, you know what? You built your career in the last 10 years in digital-only environment. Do you want to come over onto this side? Because what we built can actually make the world a better place. What about non-interruptible power supply, renewable energy, all of that? Do you care about all those innovations? Come to our side. I think together, like within the Association for Manufacturing Technology and SME and all of our constituency, we need to think through how we're going to really ride on this amazing wave of change and provide opportunities and lifelines to people who are just wondering, ooh, what am I going to do next? Right? There are just so many good people out there that might not be considering our industry right now.
That is such a great message. Well, speaking of what's next, what's going on with Caddy, and what do you guys have coming down the pipeline? Are you going to be at any events coming up? Tell us what's going on.
We're going to be at a lot of events coming up. Probably the biggest one, the one that I'm most excited for, is IMTS, and then quickly followed by FabTech. Along the way, though, we are doing a lot of localized events. I encourage you to check our website for those localized events, but we're going to be following Design Depart around the country throughout the course of the rest of the year. We're going to be down in Georgia at the Advanced Manufacturing Technology Show that they're hosting down there, and a few others along the way that are Caddy sponsored in your local cities. So stay tuned for invitations to happy hours in your local town to join us and get to experience the Caddy tool hands-on and talk to the Caddy reps. In addition to that, we have a very large brand overhaul going on right now with our marketing team, completely rebranding our website, bringing a lot more information about how our customers utilize our tool, and a lot of the different ways in which our customers have shared with us that they've found in order to utilize our tool in addition to the ways that we tend to promote. So definitely pay attention to drawer.caddy.com for all of the events that we will be attending, as well as all of those updated use cases and brand overhaul that I mentioned.
Wonderful. What about you, Kathy? What's going on? What would you like to tell our listeners to stay tuned for?
The biggest manufacturing technology show is descending into Chicago in September, between September 9th and 14th this year. We're going to host the International Manufacturing Technology Show, IMTS, for those who are in the know, where all of us are going to rack in 20,000 steps looking at all the latest technologies from automotive to additive to traditional manufacturing tools. We're very excited. We tend to host this massive party, bringing in people from the supply and demand side. Personally, I will be working on a special project called the Creators Lounge and Technology Hubs project, where we're going to bring in industry leaders and creators and innovators to talk to us about what they think are coming next within the show floor. So if you want to stay in touch, feel free to connect with me via LinkedIn. So I'm just Kathy Ma with a C-Cathy at it's on my LinkedIn site. It's on LinkedIn. And feel free to reach out and do consider coming onto imts.com and register for the show, because when I went for the first time, my mind's practically blown when you can see a whole car being assembled in the middle of the air. It's a life-changing moment. So, Amy, I'm sure you've seen that before. So
it's like the World's Fair. I imagine what was the World's Fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you so much, Kathy and Chris, for taking time out to join us and sharing all of your insights with our listeners. We could talk for several more hours, so I hope we get another chance to speak again. And I also want to thank our listeners for tuning in. Make sure you stay up to date about what's happening in advanced and smart manufacturing, and hear more podcasts by visiting us at advancedmanufacturing.org. Take care, everybody.